And welcome to the April 2023 edition of KRAD Readings. I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido, providing monthly readings of my various works of short fiction. Just so you know, I am in no danger of running out of stuff anytime soon. I looked at my bibliography, and there are still, I believe, 17 short stories of mine that I have not actually read for this series yet. So there's plenty to go. So definitely subscribe to this channel so you can hear me read all of them. Anyway, first of all, I want to say, if you're enjoying this and enjoy my work, you should check out my Patreon, which is at patreon.com/crad. That provides monthly movie reviews, monthly TV reviews, very regular cat pictures, as well as pictures of other small furry creatures. Mostly our cats, Kaylee and Louie. There goes Kaylee right now. And other people's cats and occasional bits of dog and bird and other things. As well as weekly excerpts from my works in progress, a monthly vignette featuring my original characters, and first looks at my first drafts. You get all of that for $20 a month, or you can get some of it for lesser amounts. So please check that out. Again, patreon.com/crad. And you can also find me on all sorts of places online, but the Patreon would be particularly appreciated. Anyway, coming up later this year, I will be releasing the second of my collections of Tales of Cassie Zukav, WEIRDNESS MAGNET. I've read almost all of the stories I've written for Cassie. There are two exceptions, one of which I'm going to read this month, the other of which I will read down the line when that new collection comes out. The collection will be called Ragnarok and a Hard Place. More Tales of Cassie Zukav, WEIRDNESS MAGNET, which follows up Ragnarok and Roll, which came out in 2013. It's taken me 10 years to write enough Cassie stories to fill up another collection. This story will be the last story in the book. Ragnarok and a Hard Place is in many ways the season finale of the Cassie Zukav stories. It'll tie together several of the previous ones into a big finish. It is not the finish of the Cassie Zukav stories at all. But if you view these short stories as a TV season, where, well, Down to the Waterline really would have been the season premiere, and then this is the season finale. Anyway, I'm going to read this for you now. It will, as I said, anchor the next collection. There will also be the Ragnarok and a Hard Place will have a whole bunch of new Cassie stories, all of which will have appeared before in some form or other. Ragnarok and a Hard Place, the short story that I'm about to read, was originally released to crowdfund supporters. I did a crowdfund for this, as well as a Dragon Precinct story called The Gorbangan Rampages. And those supporters all got copies of this story ahead of time. And all the other stories in the collection will have appeared in either anthologies or on my Patreon, because the Cassie vignettes will be there. But there will be one story that is original to it, called Stop Dragging My Heart Around. Dragon, D-R-A-G-O-N, My Heart Around. I will read that story in this reading series when the book comes out, which will be later this year. Anyway, without further ado, here is the short story, Ragnarok and a Hard Place. It all started when Thor walked up to me in Mayor Fred's saloon and said, without preamble, "You must take me out upon the sea." It was on a Monday night, so the music in the bar in this open-air tavern on Green Street in the Old Town section of Key West wasn't coming from the main stage at the back of the bar. Zach was up near the front with his battered old Yamaha acoustic guitar, segueing from The Drinking Song by Moxie Fruvis into Goodnight Irene, the old Leadbelly classic. A very tall, almost dangerously skinny middle-aged man, Zach had a hook nose, stringy brown hair, and a sweet, sweet voice. To have it interrupted by the God of Thunder braying at me didn't exactly fill me with warm fuzzies. Thor had sat his massive form down on the stool next to mine at the bar. Without even having to ask, Meredith, the red-haired bartender, immediately started pouring Thor a pint of beer. She'd done the same when I came in. It pays to be a regular. You can hire a boat from anyone. Perhaps, noble Cassie. But it is you with whom I wish to take my excursion out onto the water. There is no captain I would trust more. As he spoke, Meredith put the pint glass in front of him. Flattering as that was, I wasn't a captain, really, more of a dive master. Fine, then go to Seaclips's website or app and sign up for a dive. Oh, I added as if I just remembered this detail. And of course, you have all the proper certifications to go diving, right? Certifications? The Thunderer has no need of such trivialities. I rolled my eyes. I did that with Thor a lot. You do if you want to get on my boat. Nonsense! You took the Allfather on several of your excursions when he lived. Yes, and Odin was a certified diver. He got it out of New Guinea, of all places, but it's legit. I wouldn't have taken him on any dives if he wasn't. Of course, when Odin, the Allfather of the Norse gods, first went diving with me, I just knew he was this weird old one-eyed guy named V.E. Bulwark. Nonetheless, Bulwark had a paddy card, which proved that the Professional Association of Diving Instructors, which oversaw most of the world's diving certifications, said he was okay to dive. There was, basically, no circumstance under which I would take anyone diving if they weren't certified. Not even if they were Norse gods. Very well, beautiful Cassie. If I were to acquire this certification, would you then consent to bring me to the sea? I guess so, sure. My voice was tinged with dubiousness, which Thor, of course, completely missed. Excellent! Thor then downed his entire pint in one gulp, threw a few coins onto the bar, and then departed, saying, "We will speak anon when I have achieved this goal." Next to me, Larry, an immortal who'd been a regular at this bar since Ernest Hemingway was one of his drinking buddies, stared after Thor. "You think he's going to come through?" "Hell no," I said emphatically. "It's a 3-day course, and he didn't even ask how to do it. I can't see him having the wherewithal to check the website or call or do whatever actual work is necessary." "You can say that again." Larry held up his glass of soda. Larry's immortality was predicated on his never falling asleep, so he drank a crap ton of caffeine. I held up my pint of beer, and we clinked glasses. Meanwhile, Zach had shifted to REM's "It's the End of the World as We Know It, and I Feel Fine." It came as something of a shock to me, after all that, to pull into the parking lot that the Seaclips dive shop shared with the Waterfront Bar and Grill on Thursday afternoon to see Thor's goat in the parking lot. Thor drove a 1964 Pontiac Tempest GTO, commonly referred to as a goat, which was only fitting for a god who used to ride a chariot pulled by a pair of goats in the old days. After parking Rocinante, my battered old Ford F-150 pickup truck, in one of the 4 Seaclips staff spots, and hey, nobody who wasn't staff parked in them today, I pulled out my smartphone to double-check the sign-ups for my 1 p.m. dive. Becky, one of my regulars, who worked as a tour guide for several of the local tours, Amanda, another of my regulars, who was bringing her new girlfriend along, just listed in the Seaclips app as a +1, a brother and sister who'd been diving with me for the last week and were flying back to Calgary tomorrow, Amy, who just moved here from Connecticut and had dived with me once before, and Saul, down from Land O'Lakes for his usual monthly dive. That was max capacity. I wondered if Thor had tried to sign up inside and was told I didn't have space. As soon as I came in, I saw Noah Ayub, the other part-time dive master, and the one who taught our certification courses, talking to Thor in the rear of the shop. That didn't bode well, especially since Noah, usually a calm, even-tempered sort, looked like he was ready to jump out of his own skin. Kara Zimmerman, part of the husband and wife team who own the place, saw me and said, "Hey, Cass, thanks for the referrals." "Huh?" She pointed first at Thor, then at a familiar-looking woman who was standing with Kara's husband, Andy Wasserstein. "Those two took Noah's course the last few days. They're both certified now." I just kind of stared, open-mouthed, at Kara. The woman with Andy was Tiffany something. I only remember the first name because she made sure to point out that it had 2 N's. She had been in Mayor Fred's, and we'd started talking about her wanting to learn how to dive between 1812 sets, and I'd recommended getting certified at Seaclips. Hadn't realized she'd taken me up on it. But I was more focused on Thor. "Say what?" "2 new certs, and they both said you recommended us, so thanks." Kara wandered off to help the Canadians who were looking at tanks to rent. They had done this every day, picking 2 new air tanks instead of just using the same ones they'd used the day before. Meanwhile, I was staring in amazement at Thor. Couldn't wait to tell Larry about how wrong we were. Noah broke off from them and beelined towards me. "He's all yours, Cass. I never, ever, ever want to get on a boat with that motherfucker again." I blinked. He's really certified. He completed everything. "Oh yeah, with flying colors. Mind you, he asked the stupidest questions I've ever heard, and I've heard some really stupid ones in my time." He shook his bald head, and he talks like he's in a 1940s movie or some fucking thing. "Anyhow, he's all yours now. Said he couldn't wait to dive with you." "Yeah, he said he wanted to go out to sea with me." Noah barked a laugh. "Sounds like him, yeah. He's..." I hesitated. "Kind of had a thing for me for a while." Noah glanced back at Thor. "Well, and that's the first thing I agree with him about." Then he looked back at me and was all stricken. "Shit! I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that." I put my hands on my hips. At 5'11", I kind of towered over Noah, who was only 5'7", but I also hit him with a big grin. "Why not?" "Well, I mean..." He coughed. I figured you're already going out with someone or married or something." "Well, even if I was, that doesn't mean you can't flirt." "Well, I know that now," Noah said quietly, now staring down at the floor rather than looking up at me. "You should have asked." "All right." He did look up. "Want to get a bite at the waterfront?" "Slow your roll, Noah. Let's see how flirting goes before we do lunch. Besides, I gotta dive." He held up both hands. Right. Sorry, your friend kind of messed with my head." I chuckled. "Well, it's a nice head." "What can I say? I like bald guys." "See you tomorrow?" Yeah. I mean, I'm running night dives tonight, but," he shook his head. "Yeah, tomorrow." He walked out in kind of a daze. Kara walked back over to me. "What was that?" "Apparently Noah has a thing for me." I shook my head. "He's worked here a year, and honestly, this is the first time he said anything to me that wasn't strictly work-related." "Wow." Kara blinked. "I had no idea." "Anyway, Tiffany and Thor got their shiny new Patty cards." "Nice. Tiffany's going to buy some equipment and then come back for Noah's night dive," Kara said. "But Thor's on your 1 p.m. No he's not. We're full up." Kara shook her head. "Becky canceled, so I put him in. He insisted he wanted to dive with you. You've got Groucho." "Why'd Becky cancel?" "Apparently there's a big to-do at East Martello. Somebody stole William." "Oh, jeez." William was an ugly little doll that belonged to a local artist around the turn of the 20th century. The artist had been obsessed with the doll, and Key West legend had it that the doll was possessed or haunted or something. These days, the doll was on display at the Fort East Martello Museum, and it was a huge attraction. What most folks didn't know was that it was really possessed by a Bahamian woman named Marguerite, who was magicked into the doll in 1905. I had a run-in with her last October during Fantasy Fest, and I had to wonder if William was stolen, or if Marguerite had finally found a way to escape. Andy had just finished with Tiffany, and was fondling his phone. Suddenly, he pumped a fist and cried out, "Yes!" so loudly that everyone in C-Clips jumped. Looking around at everyone staring at him, Andy smiled abashedly and said, "Sorry, just closed a sale." "What did you sell?" I asked. "It's what I bought. Another 29-footer. In 3 weeks, we can add Zeppo to the fleet." That got several whoops from Kara, Saul, Amanda, Amanda's girlfriend, Amy, and me. "That's fantastic!" I meant it, too. C-Clips had been a 3-boat operation since I first came to Key West almost 2 years ago. Obviously, they'd been doing well enough to acquire a 4th. "This mean more hours?" I asked with a cheeky grin. I was only half kidding. I also worked at the bed and breakfast where I lived, and I couldn't skimp on those hours if they paid me by giving me a place to sleep. "Probably, and we're going to make Noah full-time, and maybe hire someone full-time for the shop." "Glad tidings to you, good sir," Thor said, clapping Andy on the back so hard that he stumbled forward a bit. "Though it surprises me not that a proprietor wise enough to employ the noble Cassie would find himself to be a success." "Actually," Kara said, "I'm the one who hired her, and it's our business, not his." Thor actually bowed, which was an impressive gesture given that he was 6'10" or so, and said, "My humblest apologies, dear lady, for misspeaking." Kara grinned and pointed at him while looking at me. Where have you been hiding him? Mayor Fred's mostly, but he never expressed an interest in diving until 3 days ago. Thor then said, I have made my decisions on what to purchase, including a tank sufficient for my purposes. My eyes went wide. You're buying a tank? This is your first day. Don't you want to just rent for now? To what end? I started to say something, then stopped. I had my own air tank, but I dived where I lived, and I had a pickup truck to haul it around in. None of the other people on my dive had their own tanks, but Amanda was, like far too many female divers in my opinion, short and skinny, as was her girlfriend. Amy was still new to the area and hadn't even found a permanent place to live yet. She was crashing with friends up in Marathon. And the other three weren't local. Air tanks are heavy, and hauling them around is a major pain. But Thor was a god who could probably bench press the tank with his pinky, and he lived just up Route 1 on Summerland Key, so why the hell shouldn't he buy one? Once Thor finished purchasing all his shiny new gear, I gathered up all the folks for my dive, and we went out back to suit up and load up. While we did so, I asked if anyone had a preference for where to go for the dive. Saul, as usual, didn't. He just wanted to dive. He didn't care where. And neither did Amanda or her girlfriend, whose name was apparently Sue. Amy was too new to the Keys to really have a preference. She just wanted to see everything. The two Canadians had exhausted their own preferences over the course of the week and were willing to go with whatever for their final dive. Their names, by the way, were Carrie and Chris, and I was damned if I could tell you which was which. The woman was older, around my age, in her late 20s, and her brother was in early 20s. I'd started referring to them as Thing 1 and Thing 2. Thor, however, pointed east. Might we take a heading that bears us in that direction, away from the sun's motion? I shrugged. Sure. We cast off, heading due east. I wasn't sure how far out I wanted to go, but then Thor himself said, If you will drop anchor here, sweet Cassie, I believe that this will be the location for a most memorable adventure beneath the sea. One could argue that fate has brought us here. That made me twitch. Okay, the reason why there are so many Norse gods in my life is because, it turns out, I'm a Norse fate goddess, one of the Disir. Every once in a while, triplets are born who are Dis. And one of those whiles was me, my brother Paul, and our never-named sister who was stillborn. I found this out a year ago when Loki tried to bring about the end of the world, Ragnarok, by enabling a long winter, Fimbulvetter, and sundering a root of the world tree, Yggdrasil. Said root happened to be the ficus around which Mayor Fred's was built. Loki has since died, at the hands of a mermaid out for revenge. For that matter, Odin, the Allfather of the Aesir, was also dead, after stopping the collective spirit of the Calusa from killing people and destroying fellow spirits. One of the latter was my roommate, the ghost of Captain Jeremiah Bottroff, whose afterlife Odin saved in the nick of time. My life, it ain't boring. I stopped Groucho, and we dropped anchor and raised the red flag with the white diagonal stripe that indicated that we were a diving boat. Everyone put on their tanks, flippers, and regulators. Besides being certified, one of the inviolable rules of any legitimate scuba diving operation is that you never let anyone dive alone. You must have a buddy. The siblings dived together, as did the couple. I put Amy with Saul, leaving me with Thor. Which was inevitable. He was hardly about to accept another dive buddy, and besides, it wouldn't be fair to inflict him on anyone else. Especially not Amy. Like me, Amy was tall, only an inch shorter than me, and she had a bright smile that I knew Thor would try very, very hard to flirt with. I liked Amy. Having another tall woman around to bitch about how hard it was to find diving gear for big, curvy women was really nice, and I didn't want tall, bombastic, and stupid to sour her on Sea Clips. When we first went into the water, I was more nervous than I'd been since my first time out as a dive master when I started working for Sea Clips a year and a half ago. For all that Noah and Kara both said he did great on his certs, I had no faith in the Thunderer's ability to dive safely and properly. So imagine my surprise when he saw that he made the safety stops and swam properly and didn't breathe too heavily and stayed close to me as his dive buddy. Once it was clear I wasn't going to have to babysit him, something I'd done more often than I'd liked when he'd gotten drunk at Mayor Fred's, I relaxed and enjoyed the dive. It was a clear, lovely April afternoon in the Atlantic Ocean. The coral was beautiful and almost shimmering in the refracted sunlight, and the fish were out in force. Some giant spiny lobsters, a bunch of blue angelfish, and some grouper. They were practically posing for pictures. So naturally, I didn't have my camera with me. I was so verklempt from seeing Thor's goat in the parking lot that I totally forgot to grab my camera bag out of Rocinante. I didn't realize it until we'd already set out, and I noticed the Canadians futzing with the underwater camera they bought after their first dive last week. I didn't regret it until now. Thor seemed to be swimming toward a particular destination that was east of us. I was worried that we were getting a little too far from where Groucho was anchored, but he really seemed to have a purpose. To be fair, Thor almost always moved with a purpose, but it was usually a pretty mundane or tiresome purpose, like sleeping with any woman he came across, or single-handedly depleting the world's beer supply. And then he slowed down and seemed to be staring at a particular spot. At first, I didn't see anything, but after a few moments, I saw movement on the sea floor, the sands shifting and undulating. Then something very big and very green burst forth from under the ground and into the water in front of Thor. I have no idea how long I just stared at the thing as I drifted, staring wide-eyed and stupefied at what could only be described as a giant sea serpent. It was at least 20 feet long, covered in dark green scales with tinges of gold all throughout. It had a giant snout, massive teeth, but no limbs. And suddenly, I realized that it was familiar. Or rather, the scales it was covered in were. I'd last seen a tail covered in scales just like that a year ago, in the days leading up to Loki's attempt to bring about Ragnarok. According to Odin, the tail belonged to Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent. Thor, for his part, charged right at the serpent. That's when I really started to get the willies. Over the last year, I'd become quite the expert in Norse myth, and one of the things that's supposed to happen during Ragnarok is Thor fighting Jormungandr. Thor was holding his hammer aloft. I hadn't even realized he still had the stupid thing on him while he was diving. The serpent started to encircle him, looking like it was going to try to squeeze the life out of him. Even though it was a clear, beautiful day, lightning struck the water right above us. I felt like I'd been suffused with static electricity, all the hairs on my body standing on end despite being underwater. On the one hand, I felt like I should be doing something to help Thor. On the other hand, for all that he was a big honking doofus, he was also the god of thunder. I was just a fake goddess. Plus, my mouth was dry, neat trick underwater, and I couldn't actually make my limbs move. And my body was sort of drifting upward toward the surface a bit, so even if there was anything I could do, I wasn't able to get my shit together to actually do any of it. So I watched as the serpent wrapped itself around Thor's torso tighter and tighter. And then Thor just flexed his arms. It really didn't look like he'd done much of anything, just, opened his arms. But suddenly Jormungandr didn't have a grip on him anymore. The serpent swam up and around, and only then did I realize that, even though at least 30 feet of serpent was coiling around, it was still coming up out of the ground. Its tail was still anchored in the seabed. Of course, according to myth, the serpent surrounded all of Midgard, aka Earth, so its length may have been the entire circumference of the planet. Thor jumped onto Jormungandr's neck and started to choke it. In response, the serpent started moving up toward the surface. Fuck. While Jormungandr's head kept rising, his body coming further and further out of the ocean floor, Thor kept his grip on the creature's neck. In mere moments, it would break through the surface. After a second, I swam back upward too. Normally, I'd make a safety stop for 5 minutes or so, about 15 feet from the surface, to give my body a chance to shed excess nitrogen accumulated underwater. But normally, I wasn't watching a battle that could signal Armageddon. Besides, we hadn't been down that long. Also, if this fight went bad, nitrogen narcosis was going to be the least of my problems. Just as my head burst through the surface, I saw another bolt of lightning sizzle down out of the clear sky. The serpent's head was at least 50 feet above water at this point, Thor clinging to the neck with a viciously tight grip. A thunderclap boomed through the air at the same time the lightning struck the Midgard serpent right on the crown, burning the top of the creature's head. The green and gold scales came flying off into the ocean. The thunderherd spit out his regulator, and I could see a huge-ass grin on his bearded face. I tread water, wondering what was going to happen next, and also worried that I couldn't actually see Groucho. Based on the way we'd been going underwater, it was probably about 200 or 300 yards east of us, which, I realized after noticing the position of the sun, was behind me. But I wasn't about to turn around to verify, as I was riveted by what was going on in front of me. You will rue the day you challenge the Thunderer, Jormungandr! Of course, Thor would use the verb to rue in a sentence. Another bolt of lightning struck the serpent, shattering more scales and leaving a massive burning wound in the creature's head. I stared in amazement as the serpent started to fall listlessly toward the surface, Thor now letting go and allowing himself to fall toward the water. Just as he was twisting himself into a diving motion, the serpent spit some kind of viscous liquid from its snout right at Thor that covered him from head to toe. I'd only known Thor for about 5 months or so. In that time, I'd heard him bellow, I'd heard him drunkenly shout, I'd heard him rant and rave, I'd heard him attempt to be seductive, I'd heard him gloat, and I'd heard him give toasts very, very loudly. I'd never heard him scream in pain before. Kind of wished I wasn't hearing it just then, either. It was one of those screams that you didn't so much hear as feel in your bones. As he fell to the ocean, the scream dopplered, getting louder and fiercer and deeper. I swam toward where he splashed down, taking a second to glance back and verify that Groucho was, in fact, behind me. In fact, I was lucky. It looked like it was only about 150 yards or so. Thor hit the water with a massive splash, which I got a bit of the far end of as I swam toward him. But by the time I reached him, he had resurfaced and was floating, but no longer screaming. I wasn't sure if that was a good sign or not. By the time I reached him, it was obvious that it was a bad sign. He wasn't breathing. And then, he just faded away into nothingness. This freaked me the fuck out. Not the fading away part. That was apparently normal when one of the Aesir shuffled off this not-so-immortal coil. Thor was the third god to die in front of me. The others were Odin, after he helped me and Paul twist the fate of the last Calusa, and Loki when that mermaid slashed his throat. Both of them also just kind of faded away like this. No, what freaked me the fuck out was that Thor was dead. So it seemed with the Midgard serpent. Jormungandr's head was floating in the ocean, but then he faded away also. Now I was treading water all by myself. For lack of anything better to do, I went back underwater. Swimming was way easier underwater when you had flippers on your feet and a big-ass air tank on your back, and worked my way back to Groucho. I was by myself for a long time. My phone had no signal. We had radio and satellite phones for emergencies, and for that reason, Kara and Andy had refused to make the boats Wi-Fi enabled. So I just stared out at the Atlantic Ocean. 800 years ago, Loki tricked Hoder into killing Balder. A year ago, we had Fimbulvetr. Today, Thor fought and killed and was killed by the Midgard serpent. 3 portents of Ragnarok. I really didn't want the world to end. It was when Amanda and Sue came back from their dive, they'd been down for an hour, that things got weird. Why you all geared up, Cass? I blinked. Excuse me? Amanda repeated her question. Well, it's traditional to gear up when you go diving, what with the inability of humans to breathe on their own underwater. Who were you diving with? Amanda asked, aghast. Boggled at the question, I said, Thor, but he... Who? I blinked. Thor? Big guy, red hair? Talks like he's declaiming to the cheap seats at a Renaissance festival? What are you talking about, Cass? Saul came back with Amy, and he asked the same question about me being geared up. You guys don't remember the 8th guy on the dive. Big guy named Thor. What kind of a name is Thor? Saul asked. That particularly threw me, as Saul was a major comic book nerd. After the Norse god of thunder, I said slowly. The Norse didn't have a god of thunder. And right there, I realized there was some serious shit going on. Not only had another sign of Ragnarok happened, not only was Thor dead, but now history was being rewritten. I'd seen this once before, and it involved Marguerite, the spirit inhabiting William the Doll. Once a year, Marguerite was able to change places with someone for a day. But the spell she cast didn't just alter where her mind was. It also altered perception and history for that 24-hour period, so that however she acted in her victim's body was considered normal for that person. I was immune to that spell, one of the perks of being a Dees, so I had figured out what was happening, as her victim was a teetotaler, and Marguerite had her drinking like a fish, and nobody thought that was weird except me. Look, I was just geared up in case something went wrong. You never know, right? They mostly bought that, which was good, as the alternative was them thinking I was nuts. Though based on the look Amy was giving me, she already thought that. Damn it. After everyone had returned and taken their break, they had another hour or so, and I offered to take them somewhere else. We went a few miles south to a spot where I actually got a cell phone signal. Once everyone went into the water, I pulled out my smartphone and looked up Thor, God of Thunder. I got no hits relating to Norse mythology or Marvel Comics. Just stuff relating to the Terahertz Operational Reachback and the Health Occupation Reporting Network, and a bunch of other acronyms. Then I looked up a list of the Marvel movies. No Thor, no Thor the Dark World, no Thor Ragnarok, no Thor Love and Thunder, and no Chris Hemsworth in any of the Avengers movies. Mind you, there was a Marvel Studios movie directed by Kenneth Branagh in 2011. It was called Hercules, Prince of Power, and it starred Brett Goldstein in the title role. Anthony Hopkins and Rene Russo were still in this one, playing Jupiter and Jove, while Tom Hiddleston played Pluto, the Lord of the Underworld. Goldstein and Hiddleston were both in Avengers in 2012, too. In 2013, Patty Jenkins directed Hercules Rise of the Titans, and then Taika Waititi directed both Hercules Arena in 2017, which had Mark Ruffalo as the Hulk and Jeff Goldblum as the Grandmaster, and the post-Endgame film Love and Fisticuffs. The Midgard Serpent didn't just kill Thor. It wiped Thor from existence. But wait, Jormungandr faded away too. I looked up Norse mythological stories on my phone and found that most of the lore I was familiar with, both directly and from research, was intact. The exceptions were that I could find nary a reference to either the God of Thunder or the Midgard Serpent. Oy. Once everyone came back, I steered Groucho back to base, being sure to ooh and ah at the pictures that the Canadians took. After docking at Sea Cliffs, I got everyone off safely, made sure all the rented equipment was returned properly, and also wished Thing 1 and Thing 2 a safe flight back to Calgary. Noah was pulling into the space next to me in the parking lot as I walked out to Rocinante. As he got out of his RAV4, I said, "You're back early." His night dive wasn't for another couple of hours. I promised Tiffany that I'd help her go through the equipment and other stuff in the store. Get her acclimated. She really loves diving. Thanks for turning her on to us, Cass. It was the most stress-free cert class I've ever taught. My pleasure. I shook my head. Noah was back to his normal self. Calm, cool, collected, not frazzled in the least. I had to admit to finding him cuter when he was verklempt. I texted Becky, telling her I missed her on the dive, and asked her what happened. Even though Kara had told me the story, I wanted it from the horse's mouth. Becky texted me back asking if she could call, and I said yes. And moments later, my phone was buzzing, and Becky's face and number were on the display. "Hey, Becky," I said after I accepted the call. "Oh my God, Cassie, what a fucking day it's been. We opened this morning, and William was gone. It's been absolutely crazy here. We've been looking all over for it. I spent half the day helping tear the museum apart to try to find him, and the other half talking to the cops after we'd reported it." She chuckled. "Honestly, it's probably somebody's idea of a prank. He'll turn up tomorrow, and then we'll have a new William the Doll story." "Yeah, that's probably it," I said, completely not believing that for a nanosecond. That night, I went back to Mirror Fred's. The entrance, which was under a giant fish, had a one-week calendar that indicated what musical acts would be performing each day. What threw me was the top line of each day of the week. The day between Wednesday and Friday was Bal Day. Most people don't realize that many of the days of the week were named after Norse gods. Tuesday derives from Tyr's Day, Wednesday from Odin's Day, Thursday from Thor's Day, and Friday from Freya's Day. My guess was that, with Thor retconned out of history, the fourth day of the week was now named after Balder. I was hoping to catch Sigyn. There weren't too many Norse gods left these days, but Sigyn, who went by Ginny Blake and was 1812's drummer, was one of them. She was Loki's wife, and had taken care of him for centuries while he was tied to a rock with a snake dripping venom on him. Sigyn caught the venom in a bowl to spare him the agony. Loki repaid this devotion by leaving her when airstrikes during the Winter War in Scandinavia freed him. For the last 8 decades, they've done a ridiculous dance where he leaves her, he tries to destroy the world, he fails, he tries to win her back, they get back together again, then he gets restless and starts the cycle all over again. Loki's death by mermaid at least put the kibosh on that. She deserved better. Anyhow, I wanted her there because I was hoping that she at least remembered Thor, and then maybe we could do something about it. Sigyn was setting up her drum kit, but she turned out not to be the only Norse god in Mayor Fred's. The crowd gathered around the bar indicated that Jamie McIntyre was back in town, along with his two-person pit crew. The entire NASCAR-loving world knew McIntyre as a threat to dethroning Richard Petty as the king of stock car racing. Only a select few of us knew that he was also Tyr, Thor's brother. His pit crew were the two dwarves, Eitri and Broker. When he saw me walk in, Tyr said to the large collection of fangoobers surrounding him, "Excuse me, folks, gotta talk to this little lady about some family business." Some of the groupies looked cranky, but the ones who knew me whispered that it was okay. Ever since the incident over Christmas, a lot of the locals knew more or less what I was, and the ones who didn't believe it just figured it was yet another Key West tall tale like all the others. Because so many people were hovering around the bar, the table by the ficus was free. I sat there, joined soon thereafter by Tyr, Eitri, and Broker. Tyr had a bourbon, and Eitri and Broker both had pint glasses half filled with beer, a stout for Eitri and a pilsner for Broker. "It's good to see you, Cassie," Tyr said with his incredibly fake southern accent. "Was hoping to catch you here. We got us a serious problem." "I was going to say the same thing," I said, "and I really, really hope it's the same serious problem I need to tell you about. Because if we've got two serious problems, we're fucked. Especially since mine may mean the end of the world. Alls I know is Thor's completely disappeared. Been wiped off the planet. Don't nobody remember him or nothing. Just spent the last 20 minutes trying to see if anybody remembered, and nobody does. Not even Larry." Eitri added, "And it is now Bal Day. I must confess, Balder deserves to have a day named for him far more than Tyr's loutish brother." "Nonetheless," Broker said, "this is a rather extreme method of righting that wrong." "It's worse than you think," I said. Adina came over with a pint of amber beer for me that Meredith had started pouring as soon as I walked in, and after she put it down, I thanked her, and then told them all what happened in the Atlantic Ocean that afternoon. "Odds blood," Broker muttered. "It's worse than we feared," Eitri said. "No, it's exactly what we feared," Tyr said, "but it's worse than we'd hoped. I figured my brother pissed off a spellcaster or something." "Well, he might have." I then launched into the story of William the Doll, and how Marguerite was a spellcaster who had the capability to do what had happened here today. "The magics we are seeing now," Eitri said, "are not quite the same as those you describe in your tale of this Marguerite woman. But it is also true that most spellcasters know more than one spell." "I don't know, I only know the one," I muttered. A familiar voice that I hadn't heard since last Thanksgiving came from behind me. "Perhaps, but you cast it superlatively." I turned to see a tall man with a monk's fringe of white hair around the back of his bald head, a missing eye, and a sad demeanor. Tyr, Eitri, and Broker all went wide-eyed. "All Father," they all muttered. I was just as wide-eyed and also pissed. "Could have sworn you were dead." Odin's answer was not what I was expecting. "I was, Cassie, and thereby hangs a tale." He strode past the merch table and approached us. I yanked a chair from another table, and Odin joined us. I signaled to Dina, who came back over. Tyr and the dwarves were gaping. I had a feeling they really wanted to either stand up or get down on their knees, but they were aware enough of their surroundings not to go quite that far in the middle of a crowded bar. "Good to see you again, V.E., Adina said. "It's been ages." "It's good to be back here, Adina. Thank you." "Bourbon? Neat?" Odin smiled. "Yes, please." "Why did you not inform us you had returned?" Tyr asked, with nary a trace of Jamie McIntyre's stupid accent. Before he could answer, Sigyn came down from the small stage and came to the table, a bright smile lighting up her pale face. "All Father, you've returned." "I have indeed. Can you spare a moment? I must tell the tale of my return to all the Aesir who remain." I shuddered, realizing that with the exception of the sea gods Ron and Aegir and their daughter Hevring, all the Aesir who remained were at this table. Well, okay, and my brother Paul also. He was back home in La Jolla. "A few moments, yes. We're scheduled to start our set in 5 minutes." There wasn't room for another chair around the small table, so Sigyn just stood between me and Tyr. "After we defeated the last Calusa," Odin said, "I was unable to remain among the living, so I had to leave until I could gather enough strength to return. I existed between realms, until then, marshalling my might. I may have taken longer to do so, but I felt a disturbance in the 9 worlds, and so I came back, perhaps prematurely. Thank you, Adina. You're welcome, Adina said, having put Odin's bourbon in front of him. After she walked off, Odin took a sip of his drink, and then continued. Because I am still not at full strength, I was limited as to where on Midgard I might return. It needed to be near one of the roots of Yggdrasil, but I found that the root here, he pointed at the ficus, to be inaccessible. However, another root of the world tree is in Denmark. The lighthouse? Sigurd asked. Odin nodded. Which lighthouse? I asked. Tyr actually answered, still not using his accent, thank fuck. The Hammerod Fyr. It is a lighthouse on the island of Bornholm. Why there? I asked. Sigurd replied, because the lighthouse keepers have an additional charge beyond providing light for vessels traversing the Baltic Sea. They guard the head of Mimir. I held up a finger. I know this one. Mimir is the wisest being in all the 9 worlds, right? Odin nodded, and I wished to consult him about the disturbance. So I traveled along Yggdrasil to the tree on Bornholm and consulted with Mimir. He informed me that I needed to hie myself to the Florida Keys as fast as possible. I lacked sufficient strength to traverse Yggdrasil again, and besides, this tree, as well as several other routes of Yggdrasil throughout Midgard, was blocked. So I chose more mundane means. My flight arrived this afternoon. Sadly, it was too late to aid Thor in his battle against Jormungandr, which is cause for concern, as Thor's death has had effects that none of us may have anticipated. Well, I've got an idea of who might be causing all this, but I'm not sure why. I told Odin about William the Doll, but Marguerite didn't know anything about the Aesir when I confronted her, and until yesterday she was stuck in a display case without access to Google, so I'm not sure how she'd be bringing about Ragnarok so specifically now. There is a particular charge I was given by Mimir, should I not be able to save Thor from Jormungandr. The next confrontation will occur on Fishhawk Key on the morrow. Cassie, I will require your services. Your afternoon scuba diving excursion tomorrow has but 2 sign-ups. Might you convince the pair of them to postpone their trips or switch to another dive master? I have already reserved the other 4 places for myself, Tyr, Ron, and Aegir. Should your customers exceed, I wish to have Hevering and Sigyn take their places. I just sort of stared at him for a second. What exactly do you plan to do? That is where the battle will take place, Sigyn said. And you cannot go into battle with the Einherjar, as they are all long gone. She was referring to the fallen warriors of Valhalla, who were basically Odin's ground troops. He needs not the Einherjar, Tyr said. The last of the Aesir will confront Hell's demons. Wait, I said, dredging up my memories of the legends of Ragnarok. You want me to take you out to Fishhawk Key to fight Hell on a boat? If we do not, the consequences will be dire. I shook my head. Consequences will be dire if we do, too. From the stage, Sigyn's bandmates in 1812 were waving at her. I must go, Sigyn said, as the set is about to commence. However, I will be ready to do battle against my erstwhile daughter-in-law. As she went off to the stage, Sigyn's words prompted a realization in my brain meats. Hel was the goddess in charge of the underworld, and also Loki's daughter. Hang on, isn't Loki supposed to be the one captaining the boat? As with the Einherjar, Odin said, Hel will no doubt have to make do. If Valhalla's fallen aren't around, what makes you think Hel is? I do not know for sure, but Mimir's instructions were quite clear. Eitri asked, are you sure having Hevering and Sigyn and Ron accompanying you is a good idea? Broker put in, we would gladly take their places. Oh, spare me the sexist bullshit, I said. I'd trust those 3 in a fight any day. Don't you worry none, Tyr said, back in his Jamie McIntyre accent for reasons passing understanding. You 2 will be part of the fight in your usual way. We'll be needing y'all to make some weapons. Before midday tomorrow, Odin added. Whatever the Allfather wishes, Eitri said. That raised another question for me. Have Ron, Aegir, and Hevering agreed to this? Not as yet, Odin said ruefully. They are who I will speak with next. Okay. I was a bit dubious about Hevering. Ron and Aegir would probably do whatever Odin wanted on general principle, but Hevering was a little more, well, ditzy than that. Still, that was his problem, not mine. I pulled out my smartphone and pulled up my C-Clips app. Unlike Odin, I had staff access, so while he only saw that there were 4 slots available, I saw who had taken the other 2. The good news was that they were Rainey and Rance. The former was one of my regulars who tended to cancel a third of the time anyhow. If by some miracle he didn't cancel, I could fob him off on another dive master. As for Rance, I'd have no problem convincing him to switch. I had 2 texts waiting, and one, hilariously, was from Rance. I need to cancel my dive with you tomorrow, as my Monday morning court appearance has now become a Friday morning court appearance, much to my chagrin. That settled that. The other text was from my twin brother, Paul, asking me to give him a call when I had a chance. I got up from my chair. With 1812 tuning up, it was going to get really loud in here, and said, Rance is taken care of. I got to make a phone call, then I'll get Rainey to switch. Thank you, Odin said. After I talked to Paul, I texted Rance, telling him it was okay as I needed to fill the spots with Norse gods, including the back from the dead Odin. Then I texted Rainey, who informed me that he had been planning to cancel anyhow, he just hadn't gotten around to it. Imagine my surprise. I told him I'd take care of it, then went into the C-Clips app. Rance had already removed himself from the 1 p.m. dive, which now just had V.E. Bulwark and a +1, and Jamie McIntyre and a +1. I guess that Ron and Aegir didn't have identities they used to pass for normal amongst the mundanes, or if they did, Odin didn't know what they were. I didn't know Hevering's either, so after I removed Rainey's reservation, I added Ginny Blake and a +1. I went back to the bar and filled everyone in on my assorted conversations. After that, we all agreed to meet the following morning at my room at the Bottroff House bed and breakfast. Eitri and Broker promised to have weapons ready by then. After Odin left to find Ron and Aegir, the dwarves also departed to start working on weapons, and Tyr and I settled down to watch 1812 play, interrupted by periodic requests for autographs from Jamie McIntyre. I noticed that Sigyn's drumming was not up to her usual standard. She kept the beat perfectly, like always, but there was no emotion in her drum work. She was pretty much a glorified drum machine back there. Her singing was fine too, but also lacking in feeling. Luckily, she only sang lead on a few songs. Just as their third set started, I got a text from Rance. Meet me at the pier. I blinked in surprise. Rance lived and worked in Miami, and my text exchanges with him had only been a couple of hours ago. No way he could have gotten here that fast. I gotta go, I said, getting up. Tell Adina to put my drinks on my tab, and I'll see you all in the morning, okay? Get yourself a good night's sleep, Cassie, Tyr said. Big day tomorrow. Yeah. I waved to the stage. Bobby Malevsky, the lead guitarist and one of the singers, nodded it back at me, looking slightly confused. At some point, I would have to fill in her and Jaina Neha, the keyboardist, rhythm guitarist, and another of the singers, on what was going on. Or Sigyn would. Chet Smith, the bass player, didn't give a shit, so nobody would need to fill him in. It was just a short walk up Tiff's Street to Mallory Square and the big pier. During the day, it was always full of vendors and such, plus the occasional performer. As sunset drew nearer, the number of performers grew, as did the number of people who came to watch and celebrate the beautiful sunset. This happened every day, and the fact that they celebrated the sunset every day on the island was one of the billions of reasons why I loved it here so much. I've been living on Key West for the better part of 2 years at this point, and I had yet to grow tired of the magnificence of the sun setting over the Gulf of Mexico. An amazing burst of reds, oranges, yellows, and purples painting the sky. Once the sun set, though, the crowd dispersed, the performers finished their acts, and the vendors closed up shop. Now, at nearly midnight, there were just a few people scattered up and down the stone pier. Sitting on the little step down by the edge of the pier was Rance. His short, dark hair blew in the breeze off the Gulf, and it looked like he hadn't shaved today, so the cute cleft in his chin was covered in stubble. He was staring out at the Gulf. Hey, you, I said as I sat down next to him. You're a long way from home. But not a long way from Key Largo. I was working on a case there and was just about to drive back to Miami when I got your text, so I drove south on the A1A instead of north so I could see you. Well, why not just come to Mayor Fred's? You wouldn't have caught Odin, he's already left. Eitri and Broker too, but you could have seen Tyr, and I really just wished to speak with you, alone, away from all the distractions of the music and of the Aesir. Besides, the accent that Tyr uses tends to grate on my nerves. He gave a tiny smile at that, though he still hadn't turned to look at me, still staring out at the horizon. Can't argue with that. I joined him in gazing out at the water. So what do you want to talk about? He was silent for a moment. You said Odin has returned from the dead. and that you're taking him and several other Aesir out on your 1 o'clock dive tomorrow? I nodded. Tyr, Sigyn, Hevering, Ron, and Aegir. I assumed as much, since there were more of you, and unless there were more of you in Key West that I was unaware of. If you're unaware, we all are too. I turned to look at him again and smirked. You worried about me? Finally, he turned to look at me. His eyes looked haunted. And then he did something he almost never did. Yes. Special Agent Rance Demetrigian of the FBI lived by the credo that you should never use 2 words when 50 would do. So to see him now giving me a 1-word answer actually scared me even more than watching Thor die and get erased from history. Look, I'm just the chauffeur. Trust me, it'll all turn out okay, okay? Are you truly sure that the outcome won't be devastating? I grinned. Fate goddess, remember? Don't worry. I'm afraid that worrying is all I can do right now. I would prefer to go with you, to fight by your side. Very chivalrous, but nobody's fighting by my side. Like I said, I'm the chauffeur. The gods are doing all the heavy lifting. After a second, he looked away again, staring at a point on the horizon. He put his right hand on top of my left hand, and I decided the hell with it and turned my hand over so they would clasp. His hand was warm and comforting. Finally, he spoke again. I want to ask you a very big favor. Well, no. I want to ask you 2 very, very big favors. Name them, I said without hesitation. Keep in touch with me via text message during the fight, please. I need to be informed how the fight is progressing, and if you truly are only serving to bring the combatants to the field of battle, you should be in a position to comment on it. I might be in the courtroom and not able to reply right away, but still, I would greatly appreciate it if you'd keep me informed. Absolutely. What's the second thing? He leaned forward, grabbed my head, and kissed me. I was taken aback for a second and then returned the kiss. About fucking time. For a guy who talked too much, Rance was shit at letting me know how he felt. Until this second, I wasn't 100% sure if he was interested in me sexually or romantically. The intensity, passion, and feeling in the kiss made it clear that he very much was. Several eternities later, our lips parted and we stared at each other. The haunted look was gone from his eyes. What took you so fucking long there, Demetrigian? A lot of factors went into my not taking our friendship to the next level. The biggest was what happened on this very pier. I burst out with a laugh. A little over a year ago, Rance had been ensorcelled by a Nixie who tried to fuck him to death while underwater. She'd done that to a great number of men over the centuries. I've been able to save him, and I gave him CPR on this very pier while he was naked. He actually smiled a bit at that. I'm afraid it took some time for me to retain enough of my self-worth and dignity in your presence after that incident with Jerry. The smile fell. I've also always been cautious of getting involved with anyone because of the dangers inherent in my own work. In addition, the more I got to know you, the more I realized how dangerous your world is, even more so than mine. I routinely face criminals who would gladly do me harm given half a chance. And you routinely face monsters and nixies and dragons and demons who would do the same to you. I feared for what kind of hurt we might be subjecting ourselves to if we got more deeply involved. Okay. That's all bullshit, by the way. But fine, whatever. What changed your mind? When you texted me that you were taking a sea voyage with a resurrected Odin, I feared the worst. And I came to the rather devastating realization that I was already deeply involved. I smiled and cupped his stubble-covered cheek. Me too. We kissed again, though it was quicker and less intense. He put his right arm around my shoulder, and I leaned into his chest. We just stared out at the ocean. After a nice silence, he said, You mentioned Ron and Aegir and Hevering, but not Hrothgar. Was he not invited? Hrothgar was Hevering's lover, whom she imprisoned in a box for 1,000 years against his will, so the bloom was off that rose. Oh, he's mortal, not one of the Aesir. Good, because Hrothgar's not available. Where'd the Navy send him? The Philippines. After the incident with Hevering, Hrothgar, and the box, Rance had set up a new identity for Hrothgar, after which he enlisted in the U.S. Navy. Excuse me. He was always a sailor at heart, and this enabled him to be at sea while getting as far away from Hevering as possible. Glad he's doing well. We sat like that for a long while, staring out at the sea. I woke up the next morning around 11 to a knocking at the door. "The gentleman has returned." That voice belonged to my roommate, known pretty much only to me and the Aesir, who were the only ones who could see him, the ghost of Captain Jeremiah Botroff. A 19th century wrecker captain, the house that now was the Botroff House Bed and Breakfast was the captain's home during life. He was killed by the same Nixie who almost did in Rance, and his shade has haunted the house ever since. He was grateful when I showed up a couple of years ago and could actually talk to him, as he'd had very little conversation in a century and a half. As for me, I'd adjusted pretty quickly to being his Mrs. Muir. I stumbled out of bed, and before I could get to the door, the captain cried out, "For heaven's sake, Miss Zukov, cover yourself!" Dimly, I looked down, seeing that I was completely naked. That was how I slept, despite having a dead dude as my roommate. Mostly because I wasn't comfortable sleeping any other way, and fuck his 19th century morals. Having said that, it was probably Odin, along with Sigyn, Tyr, Eitri, and Broker, and possibly Ron, Aegir, and Hevering, all waiting to come in, and greeting them in the buff was probably not the most hospitable way to go. My brain wasn't at its best first thing in the AM, or any time before coffee, so I tried to work my way through this problem. Odin's muffled voice came from the other side of the door. "Cassie, I hope you have awakened. We have gathered in the garden, and the proprietor has kindly provided us with a meal to break our fast. Please, join us when you can." There was a pause, and then Odin said, "I will take that as assent, and see you shortly." I stumbled into the bathroom and turned the shower on. There'd be the usual magnificent Hawaiian Kona coffee waiting for me downstairs, but I needed a bit more of a wake-up before that, so I had the shower pelt me with lukewarm water. That mostly did the trick. "Cap?" I said as I came back out into the main room. But there was no evidence of Captain Botroff. I figured he didn't want to deal with my nudity, as usual. The quick rinse down helped my brain cohere. Odin was smart to have everyone gathered downstairs. My room was a nice hotel room as far as it went, but it really couldn't fit that many people at once. Luckily, it was after the main breakfast period, so the owner Odin mentioned, Debbie Delamonica, would likely be willing to accommodate some friends of mine. I put on a bathing suit, then a Mayor Fred's t-shirt and shorts over it. I figured we'd be heading straight to see clips from here. I slid my feet into a pair of flip-flops, and then opened the sliding door and walked down the wooden stairs. I lived on the second floor of one of the two little two-floor bungalows behind the main house of the B&B. Between the bungalows and the main house was a lovely garden, along with a bunch of glass tables and wire-framed chairs. My fellow Aesir had shoved two of those tables together, and were all seated around them. Well, almost all. No sign of Sigyn, but the others were there. Tyr, as usual, was wearing a button-down shirt, khakis, cowboy boots, and gloves on both hands. That was to cover up that one of his hands was a prosthetic. The original hand had been bitten off by the wolf, Fenris. Odin wore a plain white t-shirt, dark shorts, and moccasins. Eitri and Broker were in their usual jumpsuits, while Ron and Aegir wore what looked like purple togas. To my relief, Hevering wore a bathing suit and flip-flops. She'd been as naked as I was when Odin's knock woke me up when we freed her from that box, and I wasn't sure she had cottoned to the notion of clothes. Apparently she had. Also present was the captain, who was talking to Odin. "I must once again give you thanks," Botroff was saying. "Your actions kept me from a much more permanent oblivion. And I see Miss Zukov has arrived, so I will leave you to your business." I smiled as I approached the tables. A slight breeze, and Captain Botroff disappeared. "Good morning, Cassie." Odin pointed at a mug that was in front of the only empty chair. I took the liberty of preparing a mug of coffee for you. "Knew I liked you for a reason," I said with a wry smile, sitting in the chair which was between Odin and Ron, clutching the coffee mug for dear life. The glorious smell of the Kona alone woke me up more. Ron gave me a smile beneath her intricately braided curly hair. "It is good to see you again, Cassie of the Desir." "Likewise, it was good of you to come along." With a glance at Odin, Ron said, "We could hardly refuse an order from the Allfather." "In fact," Odin said with a small smirk, "you could easily have refused. We are none of us as strong or as young as we used to be, Ron, and you would have been within your rights to decline my request." It was Hevering who replied to that. "Don't be stupid. It's the end of the world. We have to stop it. I only just returned to the world 5 months ago. I'm in no rush to have it end." I whispered to Ron, "She sounds a lot more together than the last time I saw her."
In truth, it was difficult for the first few weeks, but Loki's death finally broke the obsession with Hrothgar that had consumed her, thanks to the trickster's magics. She is rather taken to contemporary Midgard. In particular, she seems obsessed with several of the minstrels that play in this era. In particular, a recently deceased musician named John Robertson. I grinned. Hey, Hevering, you want to hear the band that backed up John Robertson on his last CD? You mean the musicians who played on Old Man's Blues and The Young Man's Body? Nodding, I said, they play at Mayor Fred's every weekend. I can introduce you. Assuming, Odin said, that we are successful in staving off Ragnarok. Assuming, yeah. I sipped more coffee. Once I'd finished my coffee and everyone had had some of the various breakfast pastries Debbie had out, we headed over to the front of the Botroff house, where Tyr had parked his stock car right next to Rocinante. Normally, you couldn't drive a stock car on a normal road, but Tyr's was constructed via magical means by Eitri and Broker, so it could. Reaching inside the car, Eitri pulled out a spear and handed it to Odin. This will penetrate any surface in the 9 worlds. Odin accepted the spear. Well done, sons of Ivaldi. To Tyr they handed a longsword. I said, let me guess, Tyrfing? That was the name of Tyr's sword, and in fact was the one he was supposed to wield during Ragnarok. Nah, Tyr said with a chuckle. Lost that sucker centuries back. Broker said, but this is almost as powerful. So, Tyrfing 2 Electric Boogaloo? I asked with a grin. Everyone just sort of stared at me. I shook my head. You people need to see more old movies. My smartphone buzzed. I pulled it out of my shorts pocket while Ron held up a hand. Ija, Hedvering, and I have no need of weapons, particularly if the battle is to be on the sea. Eitri and Broker exchanged glances, then looked at Odin. Allfather, if you lose your spear, it seems we will have spares. Odin chuckled. And what of Sigyn? The buzzing of my phone had been a text from her as it happened. She'll meet us at Cyclops. We have daggers for her, Eitri said. Very well, Odin said. Let us away. The fate of all the 9 worlds may well hang in the balance. But no pressure, I muttered. Hevering, Aegir, and Ron all started to float into the air. We will rejoin you at the vessel. I watched after them for a moment. I wondered how many people on Eaton Street and Duval Street and Symington Street and Bahama Street looked up and saw the 3 people flying through the air. I also wondered how many of them even cared. One of the things I loved about the island, and I suspect one of the reasons why it was home to so many out-of-the-ordinary folk, like Norse gods, ghosts, and immortals, was because everyone here took a live and let live, yeah, whatever, can I have another beer attitude toward pretty much everything. Eitri and Broker climbed into Tyr's stock car while Odin joined me in Rocinante. We headed up Eaton to Palm Avenue, and there to Route 1, which took us over the bridge. It only took a few minutes to work our way down the coast of Stock Island to where Cyclops and the waterfront shared a parking lot. I really hoped that this all worked out the way it was supposed to so I could eat one of the waterfront's really shitty burgers again. We all entered the shop, and I saw that Sigyn was already there talking to Kara. As soon as she saw me, Odin, and Tyr entered, she beelined for me. Cass, what's going on? Your friend Ginny there doesn't have a paddy card, and she said that you guys don't need any diving equipment. I was afraid of this. Cyclops was a dive shop. They didn't run boat tours, and they made their real money from renting and selling scuba equipment. Yet here I was, taking a full boat out without any actual diving. Well, Then Kara's jaw dropped. Her eyes went wide as saucers, and she stared over my right shoulder and spoke in a voice that was suddenly an octave higher. Holy shit, that's Jamie McIntyre! I smiled, realizing I needn't have worried. Cyclops is open every day of the year, even Christmas and Thanksgiving, and while Kara and Andy aren't the most observant Jews, they usually don't work on the high holy days, leaving the dive mastering to me, who's an even less observant Jew, and Noah. But they do close for the Daytona 500, as that's their biggest religious holiday. Kara and Andy are 2 of the biggest NASCAR nuts I've ever known. I saw the name on the sign-up sheet, but I didn't think it was that Jamie McIntyre. Tyr stepped forward. Pleased to meet you, little lady. Cassie here speaks right highly of the Paria, and it's an honor to be riding out to sea on one of your boats. The next 5 minutes consisted of Kara and Andy both fangoobering over Tyr, Tyr providing autographs and posing for selfies, and finally the pair assuring me and Tyr that we could take Chico out and do whatever the hell we wanted with it. Okay then. While they were doing that, I was loading my gear onto Chico. Sigyn saw this and asked me why. Just in case I need to jump into the water to rescue anyone. I'd rather be ready for it and not need to do it than the other way around. Fair enough. Ron, Aegir, and Hevering all floated down onto the deck of Chico while I was doing that. Andy was on Harpo in the next alcove over, preparing it for his 1:30 p.m. dive. Luckily, he wasn't looking up at the time. I really didn't want to explain anything to him just now. Though he was starstruck enough by Jamie McIntyre being one of his customers, he probably wouldn't have cared. As for Groucho, Noah had taken that boat out half an hour ago. Once everyone was on board, I turned to Eitri and Broker, standing on the long wooden dock. May the Norns weave a kind fate for us all this day, Eitri said. That's the hope, I muttered. Broker added, we will await your return with bated breath. As I cast off, I saw Andy disembark from Harpo and approach the two dwarves. Hey, you guys are McIntyre's pit crew, right? We are, yes. I gotta ask, how the hell do you do all that with just the two of you? I chuckled, but we were heading south through Boca Chica Channel to the Atlantic Ocean, so I couldn't hear the answer. Once we were through the channel, I turned us westward, going around Key West. Then we went eastward into the Jewfish Basin, heading toward Fishhawk Key. Nobody lived out on that particular island, though it was a popular fishing spot. As we were sailing alongside the northern part of Key West and Stock Island, Hevering walked up to me. Forgive me, Cassie, but I just wanted to apologize and to thank you. For what? Your role in freeing me last year. I was not properly grateful at the time, smitten as I was by Hrothgar thanks to Loki's machinations. To be fair, I said with a small smile, Hrothgar was the one who asked Loki to cast that spell. Which is why I haven't tried to find him. I'm just enjoying this new world I find myself in. I really hope everything turns out okay and I can meet John Robertson's band. Me too. And not just because 1812 can use some more groupies besides me. We passed between Grassy Key and Harper Key. Fishhawk Key was coming into view. There were no fishing boats docked anywhere on the island that I could see. That was the good news. The bad news was that a very large, strange-looking boat was sailing around the north side of the island, heading straight for us. As we got closer, I could see that there were two people and an animal standing on the deck. The animal was a giant wolf, about the same height as a person while standing on all fours. From behind me, Tyr shuddered. Was really hoping not to see that critter again. Which confirmed that that was Fenris, the wolf who had chopped off Tyr's hand back in the day. Standing in the middle of the deck was a giant whom I hadn't seen in a year, Gerard, who had assisted Loki when he tried to bring about Ragnarok and Mayor Fred's. He hadn't shown his big ugly face since Leo, one of the bouncers at the Bull, shot him after Loki sent him to kill me. Speaking of whom, there was the man himself at the wheel, Loki. Short, dirty blonde hair, wearing a poofy brown shirt and thigh-high brown boots. I almost didn't recognize him as he was just sort of staring ahead. He didn't really look like himself when he wasn't smirking. I guess, like Odin, he couldn't stay dead for long. As we got closer, I saw that the boat was made out of a translucent metal. The Naglfar, Odin said gravely. That boat really is made out of the fingernails and toenails of the dead? I asked. Yes. I shook my head. And where's Hel? And Loki's army of giants? It seems she did not survive to see this day, Odin said. And the only frost giant who remains is Gerard. A lot of folks didn't survive. Tyr was now hefting his sword, including Thor, and he damn well should be here. So let's make this a battle he'll regret missing. And then the next thing I knew, people were fighting. Aegir grabbed Tyr, Hevering grabbed Sigyn, and Ron grabbed Odin, and the three of them rose into the air on currents of wind that buffeted Chico about and almost capsized me. Once the waters calmed down, I dropped anchor. Hevering had dropped Sigyn on the deck of the Naglfar, but as soon as she did, Fenris leapt into the air and literally bit Hevering's head off. No! I cried out, even though no one could hear me. The bloody, headless body of the woman who was just a minute ago telling me how much she wanted to meet 1812 plummeted toward the Gulf of Mexico. But then she faded away, just the way Thor and Jormungandr had. Fuck. I knew this was going to be bloody, but still, to see this... Aegir met the same fate after he dropped Tyr onto the deck, and then Tyr ran the wolf through with his sword. With his dying breath, Fenris bit Tyr in the chest. Fenris and Aegir both faded away, but Tyr lay bleeding on Naglfar's keratinous deck. My smartphone buzzed. It was Rance asking for an update. Even though my hands were shaking, I managed to type out a reply. Aegir, Hevering, and the wolf Fenris are dead, and Tyr's wounded. Rance's reply was exactly what I feared it would be. Who are they? Since Rance had been with me when we freed Hevering alongside Ron and Aegir, this meant that whatever it was that removed Thor and Jormungandr from history also was doing the same for this battle. KRAD was battling Odin and Ron, while Sigyn was fighting Loki. Naglfar was still moving toward Chico, and I could now hear the sounds of the battle. The piercing soprano of Ron's cry of anguish at the death of her husband and daughter. The snap of the haft of Odin's spear breaking in two in KRAD's grip. The sizzle of lightning striking KRAD's back at Ron's command. The meaty sound of KRAD's fist punching Odin's chest. The metallic clang of Sigyn's daggers against Loki's. What got me, though, was what I didn't hear. Loki's voice. I'd known Loki for a year now. I'd seen him when he was trying to destroy the world, I'd seen him when he was trying to save the world, and I'd seen him being mischievous, and I'd seen him trying to woo Sigyn back. One thing he'd never been any of those times was quiet. Seriously, he hadn't said word one since coming into view. He was just staring into space, silently countering Sigyn's strikes with daggers of his own. Then he caught one of her parries and disarmed her. Her daggers clattered to the deck, and he punched her in the stomach, causing her to collapse. My heart started racing as I watched Loki hold a dagger over his head, preparing to stab Sigyn with it. But he didn't bring the dagger down. Odin was able to grab the broken blade end of his spear and stab KRAD in the belly with it, causing the giant to collapse. Still, Loki stood over Sigyn with the dagger over his head. Then finally, he said something, or, more accurately, screamed, "No! I will not kill her!" "Yes, you will," came a voice from everywhere and nowhere. It was a voice I'd heard before. The skies darkened, and then a formless, smoky mass appeared on the deck, alongside a dark-skinned woman. "You will complete the task I put before you, Mr. Laufeyson." "No, I don't believe I shall." "There was a price for resurrecting you, Mr. Laufeyson." "Yeah," I said. "There's always a price with you, isn't there?" The voice in that smoky form belonged to a demon who had done a deal with Robert Johnson back in 1938. In exchange for being one of the greatest musicians who ever lived, Johnson sold his soul to this demon. But when it came time to pay, Johnson made another deal to keep providing musicians for the demon to suck soul energy from. Changing his name to John Robertson, he became a famous rock musician who was able to keep going by sacrificing the musical ability of no-name musicians. He almost did it to 1812 when Sigyn and I stopped him. I heard my phone ring, but there was no time to look at it right now. The woman turned to face me. "And there is also a price for what you did to me." "Let me guess, Marguerite?" The demon said, "She is an important part of my plan." "Which is?" "Revenge. You ruined my finest deal." "And you ruined my one good day a year," Marguerite said. "So, wait. You're trying to bring about the end of the world just to get back at me?" The demon's form got smokier and bigger. "I want you to watch all your precious fellow gods die horribly and then be erased as if they never were." "That's what you need Marguerite for?" "He freed me from that wretched doll," Marguerite cried out angrily. "Let me kill her now, please!" "Wait," I said. "What do I have to do to get you to change everything back?" "Change what back?" "Getting Thor and Jormungandr and Aegir and Hevering and Fenris all back alive again. Not actually ending the world." "Thor is dead?" Loki asked. "You promised me I would get to kill that oaf." The demon replied, "And you promised me that you would kill all the gods who faced you." "Well, you never told me Sigyn would be among them." "Loki," I said, "shut the hell up. And you, demon, answer my question." "Simple. You join Mr. Johnson in the place where those who anger me go." That sounded really horrible. "And if I do that, you'll restore everyone?" "I shall." "Then let's do it." Odin spoke up then. "It is not that simple, creature. I am aware of what is necessary. I must admit, I did not expect Ms. Zukov to volunteer for damnation so readily. If it means my friends don't die, I'll do whatever I have to," I said. "If that is the case," Odin said, The demon must perform a ritual that will release your soul from the Aesir. Otherwise, he may not claim it for himself. Does that give me time to say goodbye to my friends? I asked. Marguerite answered. The ritual will require 24 hours to prepare. Fine, I said. Meet me tomorrow at Mayor Fred's saloon on Key West. Why there? The demon asked. It is a fine saloon, Marguerite said. I have spent many a fantasy fest there. A fitting place to bring this harridan's life to an ignominious end. I stuck my tongue out at her. I love you too, Marguerite. Be warned, Ms. Zukov, the demon said, his smoky form swirling over the water toward Chico, but keeping his distance so I couldn't touch him. The last time we met, my touching him dispersed him. I will not restore those who have perished until your soul is mine. Understood. Now fuck off so I can say goodbye to people. I have a lot of friends. Not for much longer, the demon said. Both the demon and Marguerite disappeared then. So did the Naglfar. Loki, Sigyn, Odin, and KRAD all cried out in surprise as they fell into the ocean. Tyr probably would have too, but he was pretty out of it. Good thing I put on my diving gear. Between my diving with the life preservers on Chico and Ron's ability to manipulate wind and water, we were able to get all 5 of them back onto Chico. I got some towels up from below decks for the now drenched Aesir. While shivering under his, Loki said, While I am, of course, grateful to you, little Dece, you should not have done what you did. We are old, dead gods. What little power we retain comes from children's literature and puerile dramatizations. We do not deserve to continue to live, but you do. Thanks, Loki. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. Now shut the fuck up. I've got a phone call to make. Ah, yes, to say goodbye to your loved ones? This is when I smiled at him. Not hardly. I pulled my smartphone out of the waterproof case I placed it in. The missed call was, as I'd hoped, from my brother Paul. Loki turned to Sigyn. What is she? Worry not, my former husband, Sigyn said. All is in hand. Paul answered on the 3rd ring. Cassie? Please tell me that you calling earlier was you telling me you found them. Yep, my brother said, at an Angels game of all places. I looked over at Odin. Paul found them in Anaheim. Paul added, I'm meeting up with them tonight in Disneyland. I winced. They need to be at Mayor Fred's at this time tomorrow. Otherwise the whole thing falls apart. Worry not, Cassie, Odin said. As long as they are near a root of Yggdrasil, they can travel here. Is there one in Disneyland? The bonsai tree that is in Storybook Land. You hear that, Paul? Paul chuckled. They told me to meet him at Storybook Land. And now I know why, I guess. It's all coming together like I said it would, right? Not exactly like you said it would. You didn't tell me about seeing my friends get decapitated. Oh, sorry, I didn't see that. Paul, like me, is a fate god. But where I can see through artifice, Paul gets premonitions of the future. And when we talked last night outside Mayor Fred's, he told me some of what was going to happen today. When I'd later told Odin that, he said that the only way to stop what was happening was for Paul to track down the Norns, the original Disir, as it were. The Norns were the 3 sisters responsible for all the fates of the Aesir. Odin was sure they were still around, but had no idea where they were. So that was a job for Paul. Luckily, he found them only a 90-minute drive from our family's house in La Jolla. But we had to let the day play out. Any attempt to change what Paul saw in his visions would just make things worse, which meant letting the demon and Marguerite think they had the upper hand. I didn't know I'd have to watch quite so much carnage, and I had to trust that the Norns would be able to fix this. Sigyn had been explaining the plan to Loki, who interrupted her at one point and screamed, Are you all barking mad? What if the end result of this all this is truly Ragnarok? Paul's visions always come true no matter what, I said. There was no way to avoid this battle, but he didn't see the world ending. Our best hope is that Ragnarok shall not come about, Odin added. Loki was standing and shouting out, That creature brought me back from my daughter's realm for the express purpose of ending the world. Actually, no, I said. He didn't. He brought you back from the dead to fuck with my head, not to bring about the end of the world. He probably doesn't even want that. If the world ends, where does he get all these tasty souls he wants? Nonetheless, little Dece, Loki said in a tight voice, he might well have succeeded despite his intentions. But he didn't. And now, we've got a chance. I radioed Sea Clips and told them we had injured on board. The story I gave was that we found this big guy being attacked by a shark, and Jamie McIntyre jumped in to save the giant. An ambulance was waiting at Sea Clips by the time we got there, with Kara and Andy hyperventilating because their favorite star car driver was injured. Eitri and Broker were pretty messed up too, even more so when I privately told them what happened to Eger and Hevering. The next afternoon, I was at Mayor Fred's. The place was relatively empty on a Saturday at 1:30 p.m. Not completely. A couple tourists here, some folks playing pool there, and of course Larry sitting at the bar drinking coffee. Already seated at the table by the ficus were 3 older women. Excuse me. They all had hair that had gone completely silver. One was sitting ramrod straight, dressed in an old-fashioned high-necked maroon dress. In fact, it reminded me of the old portrait of Captain Bottroff and his wife that was on one of the walls of the Key West Shipwreck Museum near Mallory Square. Her hair was pinned up in a bun. She had a mug of tea in front of her and was trying very hard not to look at anything. Another was seated more casually, and she looked like she was taking in everything, particularly the walls and wooden rafters that were covered in business cards and the occasional bra. She had a beer in front of her and was wearing a t-shirt and shorts. Her hair was curly and flying out in all directions. The third was hunched over a mug of coffee, her hair mostly hidden under a scarf. She wore a simple house dress and had a small smile on her face. The tight-laced 19th century housefrau saw me approach the table and pursed her lips. "About time you arrived. We have better things to do than await a tardy Dees." T-shirt lady made a tsh noise. "Ah, cut that shit out, Erd. She's here before the demon, that's what matters. Stop being such a pain in the ass." Erd winced. "Please mind your language, Verthandi." Verthandi brayed a huge laugh and stood up. "Ignore her, honey. She's got a stick so far up her ass, it's pushing her tongue out of her mouth. Come on and sit down." The third one, who had just had to be sculled in order to round out Northern Central, added, "You should eat something. It's going to be a difficult day." "It's already been a difficult week," I muttered. Erd sipped her tea primly. "This is a mistake. She's alone. Without her other 2, what can she possibly accomplish?" Well, that hurt, especially since one of my other 2 had never really been alive. "You mean besides saving the world from Loki?" "Loki's attempts to bring about Ragnarok are always fated to fail," Erd said dismissively. I ignored that. "And saving lots of other people's lives, too?" "You've survived on luck, not skill, Caster Zukov." Well, that was certainly true. Okay, 1, please don't call me that. Just because my parents thought it was cute to name me and my brother Castor and Pollux doesn't mean I ever actually want to be called that. 2, given that nobody ever fucking told me I was a Dees until Odin literally showed up on my doorstep a year ago, and I have yet to be given anything like an instruction manual, I think I've done pretty well, thanks. "Yes, well," Erd said dismissively, "I hardly expect Odin to perform his tasks with any skill." Showing hilarious timing, Odin himself walked in alongside Loki and Sigyn. "Is there anything over the millennia that you have actually approved of, Erd?" "No, there ain't," Verthandi said before Erd could answer. "And trust me, I've been paying attention. And hey, Sigyn, good to see you. I love the drum work on that last John Robertson CD. Great stuff." Sigyn blinked. "You heard the CD?" "Honey, I heard it before you finished it. Love the way you used that snare on Down the Creek." "Thank you." Sigyn was obviously caught off guard by one of the Norns complimenting her musicianship. Loki grinned and put an arm around Sigyn's shoulders. "I've always said that my lovely wife is a pearl of great price." Shrugging out of that mini embrace, Sigyn said, "Former wife." The crestfallen look Loki got was priceless. "I did break that demon's hold when he asked me to kill you, you know. I would think that would be worth something." Skuld waved a hand. Don't be rude to her. And all of you, sit down. You should be comfortable." "Fat chance," Sigyn muttered. I grabbed a few more chairs from surrounding tables, and we all took a seat. Adina came by and said, "Okay, beer for Cassie, bourbon for V.E., Sigurd, and Ginny, right? Anything else? You 3 ladies need a refill?" Looking up at the server, Skuld asked, "You have any food?" "I'm sorry, we don't have a kitchen." That's not good. You should fix that. Too much drink, not enough food, that gets very bad." Adina smiled. "You sound like my grandmother." Verthandi chuckled. "She sounds like everyone's grandmother, honey. Can I get another one of these?" She held up her almost empty pint glass. "Sure." Adina went off toward the bar. There was an awkward silence, which I broke when I realized that coming in with an attitude wasn't the best approach here. I couldn't help it, though, with the way Erd snarked at me. Look, I said slowly, I wanted to thank you for coming. You didn't have to come all this way, and I appreciate it. It was more trouble than you think, Erd said. Normally we can traverse Yggdrasil freely, but the way from the bonsai tree in Storybook Land to the tree here was blocked. I had similar difficulties when attempting to get here from the Hammerod Fear, Odin said. Yes, we know, Erd said witheringly. It was fine, Verthendi said, waving her arms about. We shot over to the route in the Bronx Botanical Garden in New York and then came here. And just by the way, not that my sister would admit this, she shot Erd a nasty look, but that problem is why we had to come no matter what. Yggdrasil's kinda our home. We shouldn't be locked out, you know? Adina came back with all our drinks. I held up my beer and said, well, I'm still grateful. And honestly, I'm honored to meet you three, finally. Everyone except Erd raised their drinks. For her part, Erd just said, the honor is all yours, truly. Skuld put a wrinkled, cold hand on mine. I shivered from her touch. But then she smiled at me, and that expression was as warm as her hand was cold. She didn't actually say anything, and somehow managed to make me feel better and be more scared at the same time. And I was already pretty frightened. Looking at Odin, I asked, how's Tyr doing? Recovering. Ron and the Sons of Ivaldi are with him at the Lower Keys Medical Center. I nodded. Good. Skuld sat up straight for the first time since I arrived. It's beginning. Verthandi gulped down half her beer. Let's do this thing! It was then that the demon walked in. I caught flashes of the creature looking like a young white woman, a tall African-American man, an elderly Chinese man, and a few more before settling on him being made of smoke again. Those were probably what other people in the bar saw him as. Marguerite came in behind him. She was wearing a battered old house dress that looked like Skuld, but it was a much more old-fashioned design, more 19th century than 21st. The demon spoke. I hope you have drunk your last, Caster Elizabeth Zukov, and have said your goodbyes. The ritual will commence now. Not eight, Verthandi said. And who might you be? The demon asked. Another friend of Ms. Zukov's? Verthandi grinned. You could say she's our long-lost granddaughter. Erd muttered. If one wishes to be vulgar, one could say that. And then Skuld stood up. You have interfered in matters outside your purview, little demon. Before she'd spoken in a small, low voice. Now, though, that voice had power and authority behind it. Ragnarok is part of our threads of life. Your function is to live off souls. By stepping outside that function, you have interfered with ours and endangered our ability to perform our function. Snidely, the demon asked, and what function would that be, old woman? Skuld smiled. It was at once sweet and scary as fuck. Fate. And then everything froze. And then everything changed. One moment, I was in Mayor Fred's. The next, there was no bar, but the ficus was still there, a noose hanging from it. The next, there were many more trees around. The next, the bar around the ficus was Sloppy Joe's. The next, there was a huge building surrounding the ficus. I'd experienced this jumping around time while in the same place once before, when we had twisted the last Calusa's fate. A bright blue thread connected me to the three Norns, and two more blue threads extended away from me, though I couldn't see where they went. Based on what I remembered from last time, one went to Paul, while the other went to wherever the spirit of our stillborn sibling was. The only other being that stood with the three Norns and me, no matter how the landscape changed, was the demon. I could see a white thread stretching out behind him, and a red thread coming out of his front. What is happening? The demon screamed. I let my mind follow the white thread behind him, and I saw what had happened. After I dispersed him in Mississippi last year, it had taken him months to collect himself. When he had, he tracked me to Key West, just in time to see me convince Marguerite to abandon the tourist she'd possessed during last Fantasy Fest. Not long after that was when the last Calusa had tried to destroy all the spirits on the island, and we stopped him, costing Odin his life. The mermaid had killed Loki not long after that. The demon had been observing all of this, which was creepy as hell. He'd resurrected Loki, tracked down Gerard and Fenris and the Naglfar, and then finally, he freed Marguerite. The last time I'd read a person's history like this, I wasn't able to affect the white threads, only observe them. With a great effort, Paul and I have been able to alter a few of the red threads. The Norns, though, were just a little bit stronger than me. Urd walked forward and grabbed the white thread behind the demon. Verthandi reached out and grabbed the red thread in front of the demon. Skuld walked up to me and grabbed the blue thread that connected me to her and said, "You have interfered in the fate of the Aesir and the fate of the Disir. This will not stand. I will not be stopped by frail old women," the demon screamed. "That might be a powerful boast. Were we truly frail?" Urd said, as she snapped the white thread. Verthandi grinned and said, "You of all people shouldn't be fooled by appearances, honey," and snapped the red thread. Skuld said nothing as she yanked on the blue thread. The demon screamed, and so did I. It felt like someone had jumped up and down on my ribcage. The landscape changed from an empty wasteland to a pile of bones to Mayor Fred's. And then everything snapped back into place, and I fainted. I woke up in my bed in the Batroff house. The captain was standing over me, along with Odin and all 3 Norns. "What happened?" Skuld smiled. "She will be fine." "Of course she will," Urd said, rolling her eyes. "May we please go home now?" "Oh, come on," Verthandi said. "I want to check out some more of the bars on Duval." I sat up slowly, my head spinning. "Will someone please answer my question?" "The demon's fate has been twisted, obviously," Urd said. "He will never trouble the world of mortals again." "Okay." Urd held up a finger. "However, in order to undo what he had done, there are consequences." What kind of consequences?" "There may be changes to the fates of others around you. Be wary of those closest to you." "Okay. What about Thor and Hevring and Aegir?" "They're fine, honey," Verthandi said. "So's Jormungandr, and Tyr and Gerard ain't hurt no more." "Marguerite?" Urd said, "That witch has been sent back and imprisoned once again in that hideous doll." "And Loki's back to being dead." "No." Skuld shook her head. His fate was always to be resurrected. Urd added, "The demon changed the timetable of that, but there was little point in consigning him to oblivion when he's just going to return, though I argued for doing so anyhow." That was the first thing Urd had said that I agreed with. "Fine, whatever." I started to get out of bed, but Odin put a hand on my shoulder. "Rest, Cassie. You've earned it." "We needed your strength," Skuld said. "That nasty demon's boasts were more true than he realized. His actions weakened our connection to Yggdrasil, and weakened us. It was your power added to ours that enabled us to complete the task." Okay. "But you will be weak for a while." She smiled and patted my hand. "Rest. Have a nice meal when you get up. You'll feel better in no time." "May we please depart?" Urd was standing with her arms folded. "Let's go, Skuld, before she starts whining." Verthandi also put her hand on mine. "Great job, kiddo. Keep up the good work." Urd made a tch noise. "It was hardly good work. This only happened because of her actions." "Shut up, Urd," Verthandi said. They all left through the sliding door. I lay fully back down. "Maybe I should get a nap." "An excellent suggestion, Miss Zukov," the captain said. "Now that those strange women have departed, I believe rest is the order of the day." "What time is it, anyhow?" 5 o'clock, Odin said. I snorted. No wonder Urd was cranky if they'd been standing around waiting for me to wake up for 3 hours. Urd has been, cranky for several millennia, I'm afraid, Odin said with a smile. "Will I see you at the tavern tonight?" "Absolutely," I said. Odin left, and I fell pretty much instantly back asleep. A few hours later, I woke up, showered, changed into a fresh t-shirt and shorts, and went to M's to get some dinner, as I was famished. Plus, Skuld told me to get a good meal, and I trusted her judgment in that regard, not just because she reminded me of one of my grandmothers. None of the Norns reminded me of my other grandmother, thank goodness. For that to have been the case, they would have had to have burned Mayor Fred's down. After devouring M's famous fries and a yummy seafood platter, I wandered up Duval Street, took a left on Green, and went into Mayor Fred's. The place was packed. It was Saturday night, so I couldn't quite see the band on stage, though I did hear them plowing through a great version of Money for Nothing, although Chet's voices sounded a bit odd on the lead vocals. The table by the ficus was occupied, but those occupants were the familiar faces of Loki, Odin, and Thor, and they'd kindly kept a seat open for me, which couldn't have been easy in a bar this crowded. But all three of these guys had millennia of experience being feared and worshipped, so it didn't surprise me that they could intimidate people into not taking the empty chair. I walked over, noticing that Tiffany and Amy were sitting at the bar gabbing with Larry. I waved to them, and they waved back. As I sat in the empty chair, I uttered a sentence I never thought I'd say. "It's good to see you, Thor." Grinning widely beneath his thick red beard, Thor said, "Indeed it is, noble Cassie! The Allfather has told me of your collaboration with the Norns to restore me to life. I fear I remember none of it beyond the tedious course with the bald gentleman and the pretty woman sitting at the bar." I was afraid of that. That meant he was still Patty certified, and I'd probably have to go diving with him again. Sigh. Adina came back with a pint of beer for me that had been poured as soon as I walked in, despite how busy it was, which made me happy. Money for Nothing ended, with Bobby's sharp soprano singing the I Want My MTV harmonies that Sting did on the original Dire Straits song, and then Bobby said, "We're going to take a break." With the live music no longer happening, the crowd in front of the stage started to disperse, and I got a good look at the stage. There was Bobby, all 5'0" of her in a t-shirt and blue shorts under her blonde hair, putting down her left-handed guitar. Jaina, all gothed out as usual, shutting down her keyboard array. Sigyn was stepping out from behind the drums. And some incredibly tall, bald dude I'd never seen before, wearing a tank top and shorts, was putting his bass down on a stand. Sigyn and Bobby walked over to our table. Jaina headed out to smoke a cigarette, and I asked, "What happened to Chet?" "Who?" I blinked. "The bass player." "Cassie," Odin said quietly. "Nothing happened to Mackay." Before I could reply to that, Sigyn planted a huge kiss on Loki's lips. When the kiss broke, she said, "Did you enjoy the set, my husband?" "Always, my wife," Loki said with a grin. "There may be changes to the fates of others around you. Be wary of those closest to you." Oi. Somehow, 1812's bass player was still an African-American man, but otherwise had been retconned from a short guy with dreadlocks who wore unbuttoned button-down shirts, drawstring pants, and sunglasses no matter the time of day, into a tall, bald, muscular guy who looked like he was the center for the Miami Heat. And Sigyn and Loki were a couple again. I took a long gulp of my beer. This was going to make life very interesting. The end. That story will be appearing later this year, as I said, in Ragnarok in a Hard Place, More Tales of Cassie Zukov Weirdness Magnet, which will be published sometime in 2023 by the fine folks at Plus One Press, who also put out the first collection, which was called Ragnarok and Roll, Tales of Cassie Zukov Weirdness Magnet. The collection will have all the stories I've written since 2013, including Down to the Waterline, which appeared on Buzzy Mag, Fish Out of Water, which was the one where Loki was killed by the mermaid, which was an Out of Tune. William Did It, which appeared in Story of the Month Club, and in A Baker's Dozen of Magic collection, which is where William the Doll and Marguerite first showed up. What else will be in it? Ron for Your Life, which is the story that featured Ron, Aegir, and Hevring, and Hrothgar, which appeared in the Unearthed anthology. Also, Behind the Wheel, which appeared in TV God's Summer Programming, which is a story that featured Tyr, Eitri, Broker, and Thor. 7 Mile Race, which actually introduced Tyr, Eitri, and Broker into the mythos, which appeared in my short story collection Without a License. A whole bunch of vignettes as well. And the story that I mentioned at the beginning, Stop Dragging My Heart Around, which is an original story which tells the story of the dragon that was in in the Bottroff House garden that I've alluded to several times, but not actually told yet. It'll be in this collection. Plus, all the Cassie vignettes that appeared on my Patreon will be in the collection as Thank you very much for watching this incredibly long reading. We'll be back on May 15th with another story. Don't know what it is yet, but it'll be awesome, I promise. And thank you very much for watching. And please stay safe. Check me out online at DeCandido.net. Read my blog at DeCandido.wordpress.com. You can find me on Facebook under Keith R.A. DeCandido, which is my fan page. You can just like that. I'm on Twitter still at KRADEC, KRADEC. I'm on Instagram at KRAD418. And I'm on tour.com at least once, sometimes twice, or even 3 times a week. Most recent pieces include my ongoing rewatch of Star Trek Enterprise and my reviews of the 3rd season of Star Trek Picard. I also did a think piece on the Dungeons & Dragons movie that you should check out because I'm really proud of it. That's all on tour.com. I got a bunch of more stuff coming out, including the next issue of Star Trek Explorer, which will be out on April 18th, which is 3 days from when this video went live. Star Trek Explorer number 7, which has my first work of straight-up Star Trek fiction in 13 years. It's called You Can't Buy Fate. It's a Deep Space Nine story that focuses on Nog and Ezri Dax. And please, please go out and pick that up. I was really happy to be writing Star Trek fiction again. Something I've written a lot. I've continued to write Star Trek nonfiction, obviously, on tour.com, and I've written stuff for role-playing games. I wrote The Klingon Art of War in 2014, but it's been a while since I've written just a regular old story. So please check that out. And I'm probably going to have stories in issues 8 and 9 as well. So that's a cool thing that's happening. Anyway, thank you very much. Stay safe. I'll see you next month.